So, welcome everyone to your second sports diver lecture. I'm Barney, so I'm the diving officer because I haven't lectured you guys yet. With me tonight, I've got Tom Wood, who's one of our assistant diving instructors. Going to be taking over in the second half. I'll be doing the first little bit. We're going to be covering diver rescue tonight, so it's a little bit more development on what some of you have done in Ocean Diver. Can I just get hands up from those who are not doing or haven't done Ocean Diver, crossed over from PADI or similar agencies? Because I know we've got a few. Have you guys covered any sort of rescue skills at all before in terms of in-water rescue or CPR or that sort of stuff?
A little bit, but not loads.
Not loads. Anyone else? Not feeling up to it. No problem. So this might be totally new to you. That's fine. If you're struggling, let me know and we'll organise a separate session. I'll just go over the basics with you, but see if you can follow it tonight. So what we'll cover specifically tonight is just developing the knowledge that you've learned of very basic rescue skills into something you can employ in the real world. So first thing's going to be the actual diver rescue itself. Then we're going to be talking about how we make those rescues effective. We're going to be talking about breaking that down into buddy awareness, pre-dive and during the dive. The practical elements of rescue, which will be done at a later date, but we'll very quickly cover them. We're also going to be talking about something called immersion pulmonary edema. It's very new to the course, and most of you probably won't have ever heard of that and are thinking, my God, they're long words, but it's very simple and we'll go over it. Well, actually, Tom will go over it for you. We're also going to be covering the priorities of BLS, which stands for Basic Life Support, or in other words, CPR. And we're going to be covering the recovery and casualty care. So first things first, diver rescue. In previous lessons and courses, you guys will have gone over the importance of anticipating, planning, and the awareness of divers. So by being in anticipation of emergencies, by planning around them and being aware throughout the day of diving, we can prevent the problems before they even happen. That's the ideal situation. So that mainly comes from your planning area. As a club, we do very extensive planning and risk assessments, particularly in open water. Most of it you will never see until you become an instructor yourself. But that's the idea. We don't want to make anyone worried or not enjoy themselves on the day. So there's a huge amount of planning that goes behind that sort of stuff to prevent problems before they even happen. It also prepares you to give assistance if problems do arise. In the very unlikely situation that you do actually need a rescue scenario, it's good to be prepared, know what to do, not just panic. We can't teach you every scenario. Every single one's different, but what we do teach you is how to assess that scenario and how to act in an according way. It also prepares you to effect that rescue if you need to. So it's all very good having the theory knowledge on what you should do, but are you actually able to employ that in an effective way? The types of rescue skills we're going to cover, and then we'll also have a practical session. Now, the practical session is yet to be confirmed. We're working with the university to secure a room. Once we've got details on that, we will distribute that through email and Facebook. So, what actually makes effective rescues? They totally rely upon training and experience. So that's why we're doing the training now. Obviously, you wouldn't know how to rescue someone unless you have received the training. It also relies on your well-organized diving and the surface support. So when an emergency actually happens in the real world, the club has a load of documentation that tells people what to do, when to do it. So that's organization. We also have surface support usually. If we have a big day of diving where we have lots of people in the water, we will have surface support, and they're usually a trained diver who is competent in rescue management, and they'll coordinate the rescue and you know assign divers to various parts of the rescue. They also rely on us having practiced those rescue skills. So in the pool tonight, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be covering CBL and AS. So does anyone remember what they actually stand for? Because BZAC just love their 3-letter acronyms or TLAs. Can anyone shout out feel free to unmute yourself. Just give me an idea of what CBL and S stand for. Total dead silence. Anyone there?
Controlled buoyantly. That one.
Thank you, Tash. So
No problem.
CBL is controlled buoyant lift, which we'll cover again in a moment. Air ascent, because you all seem a little bit reluctant to help me out. Air ascent is your alternate source. We're also going to practice basic life support. That's one of the ones where you really need to practice it regularly because it's easy to forget. I was just teaching the dive leaders this again. So it is something that we repeat over and over again because it's so important and it's something that's very easily forgotten. And part of that BLS is rescue breaths. So what you'd probably call CPR, where you're breathing into a casualty, we call rescue breaths. And combined with that, we have chest compressions. So that makes up CPR, or what we call BLS. The buddy system is also incredibly important in rescues. If you have an unconscious diver underwater, they're not getting themselves to the surface. Obviously, the buddy is imperative in that situation. As a buddy system, you need to be anticipating and planning for emergencies. You also need to be doing a buddy check every dive. So as sports divers, we should now be comfortable with doing buddy checks. I know those who've crossed over, this will be new to you, but we use the acronym BAR, BAR. I know for Paddy, it's something like BWAF or something like that. But we'll go through this with you in the pool, so don't worry about it too much. We also need to monitor throughout that dive. So just to give a little bit more detail on those last 3 points. Before we even start the dive, the very first step is we need to be aware of how our buddy's feeling, how our buddy's acting. Typical indications on a buddy not quite being right or ready to dive. If they're nervous or reluctant, that's probably a pretty obvious one. If they're kind of, you know, they're being very slow, they're looking a bit shaky, they don't look particularly excited to be there, that's a good indication that, funnily enough, they don't want to be there. If they're making excuses or they're asking questions over and over and over again, normally excuses are a way to get out of it. The repeated questions is because they're not happy with something they're questioning. So if they're asking about a particular skill over and over and over again, it means they're not comfortable doing it. And so we can take actions to alleviate that. Another indicator is stress. So if they're twitchy, if they're kind of eyes darting around, that sort of thing, or if they're slow at kitting up, or they're fiddling around with a bit of kit that doesn't need fiddling with. So general kind of delay tactics would indicate that this person is not happy to dive, they don't want to do it, there's something wrong. So rather than just ignoring these, we do need to resolve this. It's not going to help underwater. I think they've removed it now from the slides, but they used to have a nice picture of an instant pit where it starts off as a menial issue that isn't that big a deal, and then just knocks on worse and worse and worse and worse until you end up with a serious incident. So these concerns need to be resolved straight away so they don't knock on. So we could adapt the dive plan. If they're nervous about going through a cave or going to a certain depth, we can always just say, well, we won't go through the cave or we won't go to that depth. So adapt that dive plan. The number of times I, as not only just as an instructor, but as a buddy, have changed the dive plan because my buddy isn't comfortable with something that I was happy to do. I mean, if I got a quid for that every time, I wouldn't be doing any degree, and I'd be for sure. So adapt that dive plan if you need to. It's not a big problem. You can always do the cave on another day. You know, it's going to be there unless it's that cave in Malta that collapsed the other year. That won't be there, but you know, that's the point. Choose a more suitable dive site. If you're going to be doing a wall dive and they're worried about, you know, sinking to 70 meters, maybe don't do a wall dive. Do something on top of the wall, something slightly different. The main point is you do not peer pressure them into it. Don't just say, it'll be fine, just have a go at it, push them into it, because you will probably convince them to do it. And then when they get down there and they hate it, they'll panic, and then it makes your dive a nightmare because you've got to rescue them. So during the dive, be constantly assessing that buddy. So we need to be looking to see if they're stopping for no reason, if they've just stopped moving, That's a really good indication that they're not happy. They're focused on something that they're not happy about. We need to be looking to see if they're preoccupied with kit. So if they're trying to do something with a kit that's utterly unnecessary, they're just delaying going to the next stage of the dive. If they're slow in responding to signals, this tends to mean they're thinking about something quite intensely, normally something they're scared about. A good one is rapid breathing. So in that picture in the bottom, someone who's rapid breathing is a very late stage thing. If you're seeing rapid breathing, they really need to be sorted out. Most of the time it's a surface ascent sort of thing. The other problem with rapid breathing is you tend to get a lot of bubbles, and anyone who's ever been kind of encased in bubbles underwater, it's very disorientating because it makes it feel like you're sinking. And funnily enough, when people are panicking, the last thing they want to be doing is sinking. So if they're in a load of bubbles and they feel like they're sinking, they're going to totally and panic even more. Wide eyes. So you can see in that picture as well, that person is clearly wide-eyed. They're panicking, full onset of panic. So those are some of the features that we're looking for in our buddy throughout the dive. Normally you pick them up in the first kind of 2 or 3 points, just a little bit of hesitancy. If you see in the last 2 points, you definitely need to act. So you need to resolve these quickly. Stop, move towards the buddy. Sometimes it helps just to kind of grab hold of them on the shoulder strap, on the arm, just be a bit comforting, make sure they know that you're there, you're kind of securing them, they're not going to float away. Check whether they're okay if there's a problem. Most of the time they'll say they're okay, even though they're not. So you've got to take a little bit of intuition here. If you see that their mask is full of water and they're saying they're okay, clearly they're not okay. So what can you do to resolve that? Like I said, gentle but firm contact. You don't want to be squeezing their arm because that makes them feel like you're then panicking, but just make sure that they know that they're secure, they're not going to float away. And then if necessary, abort the dive. There's always more dives to be have. There's no reason to carry on a dive if you've got someone really panicking. So if you need to, abort that dive. If, on the other hand, it all goes really wrong and you need to do some rescue, there's a couple of options. So let's say we have a diver out of gas. This doesn't necessarily mean they're panicking and they're fully conscious. What would we use? What drill would we do in that situation? Anyone got any ideas? Someone other than Tash or Tom would be very ideal. Even type it in the chat if you want. Give them your other reg. I'll wait for Joe to finish typing, see what someone else has to say. Share. So yeah, absolutely. We do something called AS ascent. So that's what BZAC calls it. Alternate source. So we would give them your other egg, your octopus, or your other alternate source if you're diving a particularly different rig. So like twin sets with long hoses or rebreathers with bailout cylinders. You do an AS ascent. We'll be covering this in the pool, as well as if you've got an incapable or an unconscious diver. That's an interesting one because a lot of people, the drill in a few seconds is specifically for unconscious divers. I've done CBLs on people who are panicking, and it works because they think that you're going to have full control of them and they just stop moving. So if they're totally panicking, flailing around, not really under control, you can do a CBL on them because you then have full control. They're not in control of their buoyancy. They don't have to concentrate on anything. So it's quite an important one. I've kind of given the answer away, but it's CBL. So controlled buoyant lift is what that stands for. Controlled being the main word. Now, the two pictures on the right, the one on the bottom, I think is an AS ascent by the looks of it. The one on the top is your CBL. So that's where the rescuer in the blue mask is using the buoyancy of the casualty in the yellow mask. We'll cover these in the pool tonight. The instructors should know that some of you have never done this stuff before, which is fine. We'll go from absolute basics, no problem. So don't worry too much. Just know that they exist, and that's what we use them for. With rescue ascents, they are urgent. We don't want to be fanning around, taking it nice and slow. These are a case of I am better off on the surface than underwater, to the point where it's threatening my life. So you want to ascend directly to the surface. Don't wait around looking for a shot line. Don't try and deploy a DSMB, anything like that. Just go to the surface. This may mean ignoring your decompression stops. Most of you are unlikely to do decompression diving in the near future, but if you do, know that decompression stops are not obligatory in that situation. We always say we've managed to fix being bent. We've never managed to fix someone being dead. So it's better that you get bent on the way up than dying underwater. Or a slightly nicer way of putting it, divers are safer at the surface, I suppose. DCI can be treated, death can't. So we're going to go over actions to take in case of oxygen convulsion very quickly. This is probably a new concept to most people, even the crossovers. Has anyone heard of oxygen toxicity before? Just hands up in teams if anyone has heard of oxygen toxicity. A couple of people. Okay, for the certain to be it actually becomes toxic to us. And the way we react to this is by doing something called convulsions, which basically means having a fit underwater, shaking and all sorts of stuff. It's not particularly pleasant to watch. It usually involves someone losing their regulator and doing partial drowning. It's something that you'll gain more training on. I think it's later on in this course, if not on the next course. You guys should know how to plan to avoid this. It isn't a huge concern for you guys because your depth limit prevents you from getting into this situation in the first place. But in future diving, more advanced diving, you may come across this. So be aware of that. We will cover that in a later lecture, I believe. So in water life support, let's say you've got this person to the surface using your AS or CBL ascent. Now what do we need to do when we're on the surface? So this is something that we didn't cover in Ocean Diver. Up until this point, it's been kind of a recap of Ocean Diver. Now we're going to start looking at what we're actually going to do on the surface. So the first thing we want to do is make sure they're buoyant. Now we make the casualty buoyant first. They're more important than us. And then we make ourselves buoyant. Do we let go of that casualty while we're doing that? I mean, the answer is no. The main reason is if we're in a tidal current, as soon as you let go of that casualty, you're never getting them back. So you always keep a hand on that casualty. You'll be taught this in the CBL in the pool tonight. The next thing is we shout for help. Now, there was debate in BZAC for a long time. I'm actually just going to move along this very quickly. There was debate in BZAC for a long time on whether you do shout for help first or whether you give your rescue breath first. They finally settled on what I think is the sensible option, which is shout for help first, because ultimately you need to have help coming. That's the most important thing. There's no point doing rescue breaths if you can't get help. It depends on the situation. If you are in Stony Cove, if you shout for help, you will have a rib with someone yanking you out the water. I'm not joking, within 30 seconds. You will have the entire car park looking at you. I don't know if anyone here was. Tom, were you there when there was the shout at Stony a couple of months ago? I can't remember. There was a couple of months ago. There was someone at Stony Cove who came up to the surface and started shouting help, and literally the rescue boat was next to them in, I would say, 25 seconds. So in that situation, it makes sense to shout for help first, because before you even finish your rescue breaths, you're going to have someone helping you out. If, on the other hand, you're in a remote cove somewhere off the coast of England, and no one's on the side looking at you, or you're a long way out, there's no point shouting for help at that point. Really, it's more important that you get the rescue breaths done and you start doing the tow. So it's kind of up to the situation, really. But the recommendation is you shout for help first, because that's the most important thing. So just skipping back a little bit. Next, we want to extend the airway. So if you can see in the right-hand picture, they are using a grip to extend the neck. And does anyone remember what that does, or know what that does from previous training?
Doesn't
take
it
that as
open the throat up and move the tongue out of the way?
absolutely, yeah, bang on. So the reason we extend the airway is because your tongue, when you're unconscious, goes totally loose, and what it does is it flops to the back of your throat, and it has a tendency to block your airway. So we extend that airway, and that lifts the tongue off the back of the throat, and you have an open airway then. So that's really important. It's something you'll get hammered into over the next couple of courses, and it's something we practice quite often because it's so important. You'd be surprised how far you need to extend the neck. The person who will have or who is acting as the casualty will probably be slightly uncomfortable because it is quite far, but it's important that we do it at a certain distance, otherwise it just won't work. So the next thing we do is give 1 minute of rescue breaths, so 60 seconds. That's important. I would write down that 1 minute thing as a little hint. And that's what they look like. They're not pretty, they're not enjoyable, and we won't be doing this in the pool tonight for obvious reasons. But usually what we do is we seal the mouth and then we blow into the nose. The reason for this is because it has less of a chance of water ingress, as we have a natural reflex to keep the water out of the nose. Once you've done your 1 minute of rescue breaths, assuming you haven't received help yet, you want to tow to the shore, or you continue doing rescue breaths while you're waiting for a boat. There's no point towing a casualty towards a boat because a boat will cover way more distance than you will. It's better if you just keep doing your rescue breaths. But if you're close to the shore or you don't have a boat coming to get you, start towing to that shore. We used to teach doing rescue breaths while towing. We don't do that anymore because the research has shown that it's more important we get them to the side rather than do effective rescue breaths, if we're being honest. And the final step is you de-kit the casualty and recover them to land. So this is something that we'll teach in open water. Something I haven't mentioned yet, the point of rescue breaths. Is everyone aware why we do rescue breaths? Stunned silence again. I'm assuming most people will, but I'll just cover it very quickly. So as humans, we exhale 17% oxygen in our exhale breath. To maintain bodily functions and brain functions, the body needs 12% oxygen in the air it breathes, which is really convenient because it means that if you breathe into someone's lungs, that's enough oxygen to keep them alive. So by doing rescue breaths, we're maintaining a supply of oxygen to the blood. And although the blood isn't pumping actively, by moving the body about, it does move some sort of circulation through the body. And we're hoping that an increased oxygen content in the blood will at least give them a chance to be recovered. When we get onto the actual CPR section, which I think is in a couple of slides or in another lecture, we'll talk about how that all works and the consequences of not doing it to the correct standard. So, surface tows and shore. Like we said, you want to summon help first. This is going to kind of be repeating what I've just said, but make sure you're buoyant and the casualty is buoyant. That's really quite important because you don't want them sinking back down. Make sure they're fully inflated and their face is clear of the water. If fully inflating their jacket and they're not clear of the water, any suggestions on what we could do to make sure that they are clear of the water? Because it's quite important. What could we do to try and make them even more clear of that water if we fully inflated the BCD already? So Joe says drop weights. Absolutely. Yeah. So we could remove the weights. Most divers will be wearing a weight belt, so that's relatively easy to ditch. Some will be wearing integrated weights, which are also somewhat easy to ditch, although they're a little bit more tricky when they're on their back because they tend to be released from the front, so you'll have to lift them up over their body. So that's a little bit more tricky. Some people even dive with non-ditchable weights. In that case, they tend to have a rig that's set up so they don't need to ditch weight, but do be aware sometimes you can't remove that weight easily. And again, you want to summon assistance, shout help, blow a whistle, wave, whatever you need to do to attract attention Most of the time when you're diving, people will be aware of your presence. So you will have told people I'm going out to there. And if you come up shouting help, they're going to know what's happened. With a conscious casualty, so if you've just lifted someone up who's panicked or they've somehow regained consciousness on the way up, you want to reassure them. They're going to be pretty confused, dazed, panicked, still a little bit edgy. You want to make sure that they're comfortable, make sure that they're aware they don't need to do anything. A lot of the time, your casualty will try and help, even though that they're the one in trouble. So just reassure them, make sure they're comfortable. If you need to kind of hold onto their arm, that normally calms people down fairly quickly. If you've got an unconscious casualty, like we just said, you need to remove their mask, remove their mouthpiece, extend the airway, and start doing rescue breaths if they're not breathing. Okie dokie. So, final bit of what we discussed before, landing the casualty on the shore. The easiest place to do this is in standing depth. So that's the rampway at Stony Cove for those who haven't been before. That isn't standing depth, and those who have tried to remove kit in that little slipway know it's an absolute pain in the arse because you still have a bit of kit weight on your back because it's not supported by the water. So try and find somewhere where you're standing in kind of waist deep water, ideally. That'll make it a lot easier. With that said, you do have to be careful that you don't drop the person into the deep water if you're doing that. But just keep a hand behind their head, under their arm, as you can see in that picture, and normally you'll have good control of them. They need to lift them from the water. The technique for this has changed recently, actually, so we'll be teaching this in open water. But it kind of looks like the picture you see there. You get under their shoulders and then pull them out of the water. What they're not showing there is you should usually, because their head has a tendency to flop back and it can injure their neck. And then finally, you need to contact the emergency services. At this stage in your training, you'll probably have someone come along and take over the situation in terms of rescue management. So don't worry too much about managing that situation. Just be aware that you need to contact the emergency services and you need to start doing basic life support. Obviously put them down as well. If you have access to an AED, that's fantastic. While I'm chatting, can someone tell me what AED stands for? They're incredibly useful. They're normally not particularly common, although they are getting more easy to get hold of. I know that the uni probably has a couple dropped around. Yep, automatic external defibrillator, for those who didn't know. So these are fully automatic systems. You basically open them up, turn them on, and it tells you how to do it. You don't even need training to do it. We will cover them in a bit more detail later, but if you have it, use it. Let's say you're on a boat. Landing a casualty is a little bit more tricky. If you are doing it on a boat, you tend to have someone driving the boat. So you will have assistance. You want to de-kit them in the water. Now, in a real situation, do you really care where that kit goes? Not really. If you look at those pictures, the top picture is a guy in full kit and the guy at the bottom has no kit on. But where's all his kit gone? I mean, I can see a set of kit on the boat, which tells me that the boat covers got the kit out before the person, which is just not what you want to do. The casualty is the most important thing in that situation. If it means that your kit drifts away, you can always buy new kit. What they could do is clip the kit to those side ropes on the rib. Or if there's more than one person on the boat, you could always get one person to lift the kit and one person to lift the person if they're capable of doing that. So the priority is the person, and do it as quickly as possible without further rescue breaths. They used to teach giving rescue breaths while going through this process of de-kitting. They don't do that anymore. I think Paddy in Rescue Diver do teach that still. But BZAC have research that shows that that's ineffective and essentially hampers the efforts more than it helps. Then need to contact the emergency services, start your BLS process, and if you have it, use that AED. Cool. Any questions so far on anything I've covered? Please just unmute your mic and speak up or type in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. If not, very quick quiz. So if you guys just type in the chat for this. This is the question. What is the first action once you've surfaced with a casualty? So what's the first thing you need to do once you've actually surfaced with that casualty? I'll just give you a minute or two just to type in the chat. Okay, so most people have said ensure your buoyancy. Absolutely. So buoyancy is the most important thing. There's no point getting to the surface and then sinking back down again. The next step would be shout for help. So I'm assuming the person who said that assumed that getting to the surface kind of included being buoyant, which I think is a reasonable assumption. So it's a slightly badly worded question, but yeah, absolutely. So make buoyant is the first thing you'd really do. Next question. Type in the chat. Let's see what you come up with. I'll give you a minute or two to do that. Okay, so we got a couple of answers. Generally, nervous, excuses, fiddling, rapid breathing, slow kit up, lots of questions, that sort of thing. Absolutely. So we got, if I get on the slideshow again, fiddling with kit, slow to kit up, lots of questions, not paying attention, distracted, increased breathing, sweating, stressful situations tend to make people sweat, don't they? So a couple of different options there, but seems like everyone's got the gist of it. Okie dokie. Any more questions before we move on? Because I think Tom's going to take over from me now, and you have the pleasure of listening to him for the next section of this presentation.
Woo.
If
Interesting.
not, you may take it away, Tom.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll go through the second half of the lecture, sort of first half with a bit more detail into the BLS. So first things first, we've got IPL. So as Barney mentioned in the initial summary, so this is immersion pulmonary edema. So this is where the air pockets in your lungs can fill up with water. They're called the alveoli. You might have heard them before in previous biology lessons and whatnot. And then when you're diving, this can cause the effect called hypoxia, which is where your body is deprived of oxygen, which is actually opposite to hyperoxia, which is where you've got too much oxygen, which we'll learn about in a few lectures' time. So IPO has been identified as a factor in a number of diving incidents. The BSAC have been sort of monitoring this issue some time. As you can see, it's considered rare for 5 to 6 years, and they've the incidents what have been reported have suggested that it is actually a significant factor in some of these incidents what are happening. So a bit on numbers. So since 1997 to 2018, there's been 24 confirmed cases. But then between 2016 and 2018, there's actually been 29 suspected. So it is a growing sort of concern and something to start maybe thinking about a little bit more when we're diving. And yeah, so it can be confused with drowning. Like I said, it is where the lungs fill up with fluid. They both sort of do result in the same thing, and the first aid is sort of likely to be the same, but it's important to remember they are different. we're sort of looking at the overview of the incident. So the causes of them. So first up, so being immersed in water. So cold water, generally what we're going to be diving in the UK, unfortunately. But they constrict the blood vessels, which can cause like high blood pressure. And also when you're deep under the water, you experience hydrostatic pressure, which can compress like veins and sort of change your blood flow, which can increase the pressure on your lungs. So yeah, having high blood pressure, so that's sort of like pre-existing heart conditions, which can increase your risk. Hence why you think you've done a diving medical form. If you've not, then we'll probably get you to fill one out, but that's just a list of a bunch of conditions. Just make sure that you've not. A lot of them you can sort of work around. They just need sort of signing off by a doctor, but that is why we get you to fill them forms out. So sort of know sort of the risks what are involved. Next up, so strenuous exercise. So we sort of talked about this last week, but if you're having to swim against a current, then the extra exertion can further increase your blood pressure, which sort of links to the last bit. It just increases your risk in general. And then overhydration, which is a bit of a weird one, but overhydration, if you drink too much, then your blood pressure can also rise. So it's important before a dive not to go guzzling away on your water bottle. But obviously that's not to say don't starve yourself of water before you jump in, because obviously not ideal either.
I think it's historically dive training has always said being hydrated is always really important, and I think now they're realizing that actually that advice might have been counteractive in that people were overdoing it, and what that means is your water content in your body is too high. So obviously the way the IPO works is fluid from your blood dissolves back into the lungs, and then you get a collection of fluid at the bottom of your lungs. So it's increased fluid content in your blood tends to cause this, which is why an increase in blood pressure increases the pressure gradient, and then the diffusion into the lungs increases.
So a couple of signs and the symptoms for IPO. Now we sort of know what it is, what it can cause. So the first sign, difficulty breathing without reason. So if they're starting to become unable to do sort of normal functions, and they're concentrating more on their breathing, sort of is an indication. And then abnormal breathing, so rapid, uneven, heavy. None of these are really desirable underwater, but it can be a sign for IPO, but also various other problems. Persistent coughing, it's uncontrollable coughing, not just like one cough, but like if you're continuously coughing, sort of gives away that there's an issue. And then thinking equipment's faulty. This is another bit of an odd one, but the divers could believe that their regulators aren't functioning correctly, which then lost the slides. Which then so they could signal that they're out of air, but they've actually got maybe half a tank left, 2/3 of a tank left. So because they're finding it difficult to breathe, they're then blaming it on their equipment being the reason behind it. Yeah, signaling out of air, you mentioned, and then they might even reject or refuse your alternate supply. The diver, when they come up, they take out of air, offer them, they just won't take it. And another sort of little bit what sort of links to it is confusion. So they could start sort of swimming the wrong way and stuff. So yeah, treatment. So first things first, get out of the water. It's much, much easier to solve problems on the surface rather than underwater, which is kind of self-explanatory. And then always escort your buddy. So the buddy system is there so you help each other. You don't just ditch your buddy. that wouldn't be ideal. So yeah, help them out, assist them as much as you can. So if they're conscious, sit them upright when they're out of the water, and then proceed to give them 100% oxygen. So whenever we go on a dive trip, we always bring a medical case, what will contain some 100% oxygen. When you're at Stony, like Barney said, within 20-30 seconds, you'll have the rescue boat there, and they'll have this sort of equipment. So keep the casualty warm. Protect them from. It's probably going to be cold when we're diving at Stony. I won't give you any false impressions. Yeah, keep them warm. Don't give them fluids. Because if this has been caused, like I said, by overhydration, that's only going to make this issue worse. And then, of course, seek medical attention. They're going to be more professional. They're going to be more qualified to deal with the situation. So, yeah, make sure that they come and help you out. So enough of that. We're going to move on to the priorities of BLS. So we've actually got an acronym to remember this, which is called Dr. ABC, as you can see. So D, check for danger. So the most important danger for divers is the water danger. Being in water, there's lots of hazards. Obviously drowning, but if you're diving near a boat, there's the issues of the propellers and etc. And that's for you and your buddy. R, so that stands for response. So that's sort of the condition of the casualty. So the way that we do this is we follow another acronym, which is actually called AVPU. So kind of funny and easy to remember. So the A is alert. So making sure they're sort of responding to the surroundings, just generally responding to your voice. So asking them, are they okay? Are they nodding? Are they anything? Responding to pain. You might pinch them. Are they causing? Are you causing a reaction? And then, of course, if none of this is working, then you can class them as unresponsive, and then move on to the later stages, which will probably eventually lead to your BLS, so your CPR. So the next bit, so S, a little addition. Barney's mentioned to shout, call for help first, get the help come in. That way you can sort of move the process on a bit quicker. So back to Dr. ABC. So the A, open airway. So clearing of obstructions. We're not going to be able to. Sorry. So we're not going to be able to provide any CPR. We're not going to provide any help if we can't get any air to their lungs, essentially. So B is check for breathing. So if they're already breathing, and it sort of leads to more possibilities what you can sort of go down. The important bit for this is actually normal breathing. So that's how we're breathing now. If they're gasping for air, if they're like coughing, like this, we don't class that as normal breathing. So then we carry on with our BLS, our Dr. ABC system, which then eventually leads with C, which is circulation, or it's more commonly compressions now. So that is your basic life support, which is, like it says there, 30 chest compressions to 2 breaths. And then a last little point, defibrillation. As Barney's mentioned, if you've got a defibrillator, use it. These things are pretty easy to use. They tell you how to do it. They help the rescue. So a little bit more in detail. So the airway. So of course we want to try and clear this airway. Can any of you think of what we might want to try and clear the airway of? Might be stuck. If you just want to pop a message in chat or speak up, either or.
Water.
Yep, water. So a fairly obvious one, but can be missed. If they've ingested lots of water, that's going to cause problems if we're trying to give CPR. Doesn't look like anyone's typing. Oh, just wait for Joe a second. Yeah, so tongue. Yeah, so that's another one. So the first one we've got on the slide is actually foreign objects. So this is like, obviously we've got our regulators in our mouth, but the mouthpieces were actually attached to these. You know, they can actually fall off. And if they do, and they lodge themselves in the throat, again, like we're not going to be able to provide efficient help. Also, we need to start thinking about the diving community. So actually, the average sort of diver isn't really us. It's like old men, to assign a stereotype. If you are diving with sort of older people, be aware that they could have actually like dentures, like false teeth. You know, if these manage to dislodge themselves and wedge themselves down their throats, then you know we got to check for that and try and remove them. So next, yeah, tongue, like you said, Joe, well done. So when you're unconscious, the tongue actually like sags down and can block your airway, which I think a picture is about to pop up. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so it blocks the back of the airway. So the way that we combat this is through extending the airway. This is where we pull the chin upwards, and it just extends the neck out, and it sort of gives a gap, which I think another picture is going to pop up. Okay,
Figure out
yeah.
a look on the picture.
So next is vomit. So if they've panicked, if they've had some sort of reaction to something, it could have ended up with them vomiting. It's also important if they're actually unconscious, their stomach muscles might not be reacting, how we're thinking. It might not be projectile like coming out their mouth. It could just trickle up their throat. So sort of another thing to be aware of. Water, like Tash said, if they've been panicking in the water, they could have ingested a bunch into their lungs. Not ideal. Yeah, so like I mentioned, neck extension. So we'll be going through this in. Oh, there's a picture. So we're going through this in the pool with you when we practice our rescue breaths. So it's quite simple. It's just getting a grip below the chin and pulling the chin upwards. It's quite uncomfortable to do on a conscious person. Yeah, it has to be done, unfortunately. So then check for normal breathing for 10 seconds. So again, the emphasis on normal. So how we're breathing now. No gasping, no agonal breathing. No, this isn't normal. So unresponsive casualties. So if they're not responding and they're not breathing normally, so you've got no response, there's no chest movement, and you've got no feel of air movement, so from their mouth, and you can't see their chest rising and falling. This is where we got to start thinking about, we need to administer our chest compressions and our rescue breaths. And then utilize AD if available. They love to put this on, try and hammer in AD used to you. So basic life support. So what actually are we doing? So it's been sort of briefly touched on, but so we're trying to aim for our 30 compressions in 2 breaths per rescuer. And then again, using defibrillators, they can detect sort of beat rhythm. If it's not normal, they can fix it with the shocks. Obviously something what we can't do with BLS. And then again, monitor your effectiveness. So if you're giving them the breaths, you want to be able to see that the chest is rising and falling, because obviously if it's not going up and down, then you're doing something wrong or something is wrong. So they might still have something lodged in their throat, for example. and that's not helping anybody. So the times where you stop basic life support is if normal breathing resumes. If they come back to consciousness, or if they weren't unconscious in the first place, but if they start breathing normally, don't keep hammering down on their chest. That's not going to be a nice experience. And then also stop if medical assistance arrives. So like I've said, more experienced, the more qualified, they'll be able to take over from you. But also if you're exhausted, you don't want to be exhausting yourself because it is tiring, which you'll experience. I think we have a practical lesson with you where we have a dummy and you'll be able to practice the CPR. And it is quite hard and tiring to do. I think if you've not done it before, then you'll be quite surprised. And then in the lucky case, well, I say lucky, but if there's 2 rescuers, it's important to try and change over sort of every 2 minutes. So we actually do this to try and minimize our fatigue, like I've just mentioned. Obviously, if there's not 2 rescuers, then carry on by yourself. So the chest compressions. So again, I should have a practical, so we will go through this in more detail with the mannequin. But this little series of images sort of shows you a basic knowledge. So first thing, like center yourself over their chest. You want to place the heel of your hand in the center of their chest, and then put your other hand over the top and form this crisscross, or that's pretty much just preference, but just make sure that second hand is on top of the first. Then with straight arms, I'm going to press down on the sternum 5 to 6 centimeters, it says. That's actually quite far. You will be surprised when you have to do it on the mannequin. It is a considerable distance to go down. And when we're coming back up again, we want to make sure that we're releasing the pressure, but we keep in contact. We don't want to be hammering down on their chest. So yeah, just keep your hands contacted onto their chest. And then the speed that we're doing this at is 100 to 120 times per minute. You might have heard to sort of CPR to the song Staying Alive. That's sort of the common one. Yeah, sort of 2 compressions per second. So rescue breaths. So with rescue breaths, exhaled air can sustain life. Barney mentioned earlier, oxygen percentage in exhaled 17%. As you know, they can provide basic bodily functions. Yeah, so you can do this by mouth to nose. When we're doing this in water, we typically do mouth to nose, as Barney mentioned earlier. And it's important not to over-inflate their chest, because you can cause extra damage if you're trying to pack as much air in as you can. So it's important just a normal breath, really. And then monitoring effectiveness again. Zach do love a bit of monitoring. So sight, feel, sound, appearance. So sight, that's your chest rising and falling. Feel, so if you're providing the rescue breaths and you're feeling the resistance to the inflation, like I've mentioned before, it's an indication that something's wrong. And also, if you're like breathing down and you like hear sort of a liquidy sort of sound, then there could be more liquid to what you expect. So continue BLS until qualified help comes. So again, sort of already touched on this, sort of hammering this into your knowledge. Or if the casualty's breathing normally, or if you're exhausted, sort of gone through this. And then regurgitation, so it's not always vomiting. It's like I mentioned, when the muscle's relaxed, it can just sort of dribble up the throat. Kind of grim to think about, but it can happen. It's important to know. A little bit about AED. So the defibrillators, they're super easy to use because, like Barney said, they tell you everything. You don't need to be qualified to use these things. but the casualty's chest does need to be naked and dry. So most AEDs come with a shaving kit where if there's excessive sort of hair, chest hair, it needs to be shaved off. Obviously switch on the AED, that would be very helpful. And then just follow the voice instructions. It will tell you sort of where to place them. It will tell you if there's a shock, what needs to sort of start. And then safety, just a little bit. So ensure that oxygen is removed from the casualty. So oxygen and electricity don't really pair very well. They tend to end up in a bit of a bang. So if you are administrating your 100% oxygen to the casualty, get that away before you start shocking them. Then ensure that no one's touching the casualty, because as we probably know, electricity does carry through people. So don't be touching them. There's a little recap, got a little flow chart to go through the sort of decision making. So unresponsive, sort of squeeze shoulders, asking are they okay. If they're not unresponsive, so they are responding, you can tell them that you're going to leave, you're going to go get help. Literally just a case of leaving them there in that condition. So if they are unresponsive, that's when you start your Dr. ABC. So shout for help, try and find a defibrillator, check their breathing. So if they're not breathing normally, that's when we start to so we call for help, we leave if necessary. So if there's two of you, one of you can shoot off and go find extra help, one of you can stay behind. And then you start your chest compressions. So again, that's your 30 chest compressions to 2 rescue breaths. It's important to try and remember that. I believe that might or may not be on the exam. Little hint. And again, yeah, stop to recheck. Only if normal breathing resumes, qualified help arrives, or exhaustion. And if they are breathing normally, then you can get them into a recovery position, which you may have heard of. So there are 2 kinds of recovery positions. This will be shown to you in the practical lessons. It's a bit hard, well, pretty much impossible to show you on Teams. But if the casualty is breathing, let me try and get them into one of these positions. The first one is the Howe position, which is probably the most regular one you've maybe heard of or seen. So I think the pictures take you through a little demonstration. Again, we will take you through this process in the practical lesson. This is just sort of an overview. Yeah, wrap the leg over. And then as you can see, the head is sort of tilted onto the arm. So if there is any fluids, then it just sort of rinses out of their mouth. So the second position, great name, more stable position. So we use this on boats mainly. So on a boat, if it's really choppy, this boat might be rocking around all over the place. So we don't want them to shoot around, maybe hit their head. That could make situations worse. So again, hand on head to allow for drainage of any fluids. So the last little bit is a little bit TLC. So we want to try and reassure the casualty at all times. So if they've woken up from unconsciousness, sorry, and, it might be a good idea to tell them a little bit about what happened. Not everything. You don't want to scare them, but tell them what happened. Tell them they're all right. Help's coming, blah blah, etc. Protect them from elements. So actually cold. Make sure they're wrapped up, especially in the UK diving. Casualty records. So BSAC. Oh, sorry, that's later. So casualty records. So that's sort of noting down the incident history. So when extra medical help comes, you can tell them this is what we've done, this is when we did it, and that way they can take over the situation much more easily with all the details that they need. And then friends and family contact. So if you've been diving with your friends or maybe parents, brother, sister, etc., they might be a bit distraught seeing this basic life support system being delivered onto their friend or family. So if they are sort of shocked, then take them away, reassure them. Then post-incident support. So support is sometimes required, and BSAC HQ are super friendly. They'll help you with anything. You can just find their number on their website and give them a bell. So the incident report. So BSAC try and get people to report their incidents so then they can track sort of trends and causes of incidents. That way they can monitor their training. So like they've added the IPO this year to this course, they can add other stuff, or they can sort of see, this bit isn't getting taught very well, so we need to maybe expand this, shrink some sections. And then it's also important to report successful rescues, because these successful rescues you probably learn more from than incidents what maybe don't go quite as well. And then feedback important. We want to try and maintain the safety of diving. We want to keep diving, hopefully. So safety is a big part of it. A little quiz number 2 to finish off and sort of consolidate knowledge. So first question, how do we make the casualty buoyant at the surface? If you want to drop your answers in the chat or speak up to you, whatever's more convenient. Remove weights, yep. Yeah, so hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, inflate BC, drop weights. Yep, so that's great. You guys seem to pick that up. And then how long should the rescuer give rescue breath for once they have brought the casualty to the surface? Yeah, you guys seem to have picked this up well. Well done, everyone. Yeah, so 1 minute is sort of what we're looking for. So on average, that's sort of 10 rescue breaths. So we're trying to aim. Math is like 1 every 6 seconds. Yeah, so yeah, well done, guys. Take through a quick little summary. So we've talked about, what this is going to develop, the form of sequence. Hopefully you guys are a little bit more comfortable. So we've gone through the diver rescue procedures, the effective rescues. So what sort of scenarios, the buddy awareness, make sure everyone's comfortable. If they're not, change. Practical rescue elements. So that's if, are you diving from shore, are you diving from a boat, things change. I've mentioned about the IPO, and then the priorities of the basic life support system. That's your Dr. ABC, and then your recovery and casualty care. So yeah, just making sure you're friendly and offering help, really. So
Brilliant. Sorted. Thanks, Tom. Anyone got any questions about anything at all that we've covered tonight? Normally it's a totally stunned silence, as
Good
it
sign.
normally is. Yeah, it's a good sign. Well, everyone seems to be getting the questions in the quiz. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and ask them. If not, brilliant. Thank you all for coming. We've got you all down as on the register coming, so don't worry about that. Where's the kit store? Good question. So you should have all received an email a while ago now, with a Google Maps link on it. I will very quickly, if I just stop doing that, I'll get it for you again. Just give me one moment. Essentially, it's down the back of the Union building. So if you just walk circles around the Union building, you'll find it eventually. I'll just mark it on this map here.
There are a lot of skips.
Yeah,
Indeed, there are lots
that's
of
it.
skips around. With sofas in case wanted to rob a sofa.
Just give me 1 minute. So does everyone know where the main entrance and the swimming pool is, to start off with? Okay, I'm just generating a picture. So you should be able to see in the chat in a moment an image, and I've just marked with a green arrow. So the pool is the building in the top right. The big kind of courtyard is in the bottom left with Students' Union in the middle. So if you just go around the back of the Students' Union, go through the pool car park all the way to the end, there's a load of containers. It's like a rubbish tip kind of area. We've got one of those doors there. It'll be open. There'll be people there. As long as you turn up on time. If you get there and no one's around, just head to the pool. We'll see you in the pool. On that note, can I remind everyone that they need to be booked on the Loughborough Sport app, or you just won't be allowed in. Simple as that. You also need to bring your student IDs with you to the pool because they need it to scan you in. You also need to turn up beach ready, so you don't need to use the changing rooms before you start your session. Do you need to go to the kit store for the 9 PM session? No, for the slot 2, please come to the pool directly. It's a good question. Yeah, just come to the pool directly. If you're not sure where you're going, come to the pool. It's just easier if we have people at the kit store to move some kit down, that's all. I hope that's answered everyone's questions. I think that's everything we needed to cover, isn't it, Tom? So you should have the Loughborough Sport app on your phone. If you don't, you'll need to get it pretty quick. If you go on the Loughborough Sport app, you'll be able to book onto the slot that you've been assigned to. So you'll need to go onto the AU Clubs tile on the Loughborough Sport app and then find Sub-Aqua. If you're on slot 1, it will be 8 o'clock slot. If you're on slot 2, it'll be 9:15. And you'll need to do that before you go because the pool have a register of who's booked on there and they won't let anyone in who hasn't booked. So it's really important that you do that. If you're struggling, just have a look on the Loughborough website. They've got guides on how to use it. And if you still can't figure it out, just shoot one of us a message and we'll help you out, or turn up to the kit store and we'll try and sort it out there. But try and do it before because it's a bit of a pain in the arse to do it in the dark and cold. Okay. If that's everything, we'll hang around just for 1 more minute just to make sure Harry's happy. If everyone else is happy, then thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the pool tonight.